Some of my peoples one time. What up, y'all? This is Across the Intersection podcast. We in here again this week talking all things race, politics, culture, faith, the whole 9 yards. This is AJ. I'm in here with the full cast of characters this week. Got Eve in here.
What's
my
up,
man
y'all?
Avery.
Hello.
And Ragu is in the
How
building.
you doing, everybody?
Please follow us on social media. Facebook.com/across the intersection. And definitely hit us up on Twitter at across this. You can follow us individually on social media. I'm at Divenomous, DIVENOMOUS.
Yep, and I'm on Twitter at E to the V to the E.
This is Avery. You can catch me on Twitter at A Very Good Idea and on Instagram at A Very Good Idea.
It's Ragu. You can follow me on Instagram. It's Goo the Tech. That's GUE_THE_TECH.
All right.
Oh, yeah, and you can hit me up on Instagram at Divenomous as well. Same thing. Definitely check us out on iTunes and Google Play. And if you have neither of those platforms, you can always go to SoundCloud and peep the podcast. If you have an Apple product and you listen to us on iTunes, please give us a 5-star rating. We would gladly appreciate that because we try to be mature, and we would hope that you do the same.
Oh.
Anywho, so there's been some stuff going on this week. We're just going to jump right into it, all right? We just cut through all the pleasantries, and let's jump right into it. There's been a lot of stuff going on this week in the world of technology. So there's a technology company in Wisconsin. It's actually called 3 Square Market. And they are offering
Air quotes.
it's offering in air quotes for those of you who are in the business. They're offering like a la carte, right? Butter Crunch cookies. Remember Butter Crunch cookies, right? Butter Crunch, double chocolate, and rice-sized microchip injections. It's like you want French fries, Butter Crunch cookies, or a microchip injection. So they're offering a microchip injection to their employees, and they already have like 50 employees who have accepted, or who are willing or planning on accepting the microchip. For those of y'all who don't know what that means is, they're going to inject a like a grain of rice size microchip into the right hand of the employees. That little piece of meat, that skin fold in between your thumb and your pointer finger. I'm holding it like y'all can see me right now. It's right there.
The chunky part, that part.
Right, the little chunky meaty part, right?
And we can't make any assumptions. We have to be inclusive. So for all those who have a right hand and an index finger and a thumb,
Right.
we can't make any assumptions.
I can't assume everybody has all 10 fingers.
Yeah.
But it's going to be an RFID chip. What's that, like radio frequency ID, right?
Yeah.
So I know from reading the past couple years, there are some companies in Europe that already do this.
That's right.
For Spot and Aunt Helga.
Really? That's legit, Aunt Helga?
Well, whatever your grandmother's or your grandmother's sister's name is, but
Legitimate business?
Right. Somebody coming in
Somebody
Aunt
gonna snatch
Helga?
that.
Oh, my goodness.
But for older people as well as for animals, pets, dogs.
Yeah, and I read it. It was a co-working space in I can't remember the country. It might have been Sweden.
Switzerland, yeah, or something.
Yeah, some SWA, something.
Some
with
SW
the
European.
Yeah. Yep. And they had the little chips that you can put in your hand, and it allows you to enter and exit the building, purchase items, among other things.
Yeah, so it
without a
says
key.
it's offering the chip, to purchase food at work, to get in, and I think it's going to let them log on to their computers, right? And the USA Today article actually has a picture of somebody like swiping their hand up against like the little thing at the door, like the reader at the door. That's crazy, right? From a natural perspective, it seems like a progression in technology, that there would be some symbiosis between bio and mechanical, or bio and electronic. But from a spiritual, I guess it has other spiritual implications.
Yeah, I think for the natural side, the difference here between other kinds of biotechnologies, I would say, is that this is more on like a consumer everyday level.
Okay.
Where it's kind of cavalier and it's not necessarily medically based. It's more so out of convenience that somebody is slicing your skin open and putting this chip in there that essentially replaces a wallet, and among other things.
Well, so from a biological standpoint, would the intrusiveness be similar to someone, getting their ear pierced or, something or a tat or something where you don't have to be a physician to be able to install that?
Well, I haven't read it, but I mean, I'm sure that you probably would have to be some kind of physician on some level.
Okay.
To make sure that it,
Well, this is definitely in Ragu's wheelhouse. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna let Ragu introduce himself. Right? Tell us what you do. Tell us your background. I know because he's my brother-in-law. For those of y'all who don't know, and then
Full
explain.
disclosure.
Right? Full disclosure. Right? And then go ahead and explain a little bit more in the backdrop of what something like this could entail.
So, from what I've gathered so far about this particular piece of technology, and this allows pretty much full access, like an access card to a building, or logging into your computer, or swiping at a vending machine. So, without that actual external card, it's now part of your hand essentially. And the crazy thing is, there was no discussion about if someone wanted to get this removed. Like that process of, hey, what happens if an employee wants to leave and or wants to disenroll in part of the pilot program of having this microchip installed. There was no discussion about it or the implications of bodily harm while having this chip after duration of time in your body.
Yeah, nor would there be, because I find that sad, but I'm not surprised, because that would be anti-capitalistic to think about how to remove it. It's too pro-consumer protection, And it's like, as a company that's selling these chips and injecting them, that's just all benefit the collection of data.
Right.
Like with Amazon Web Services or however else they're collecting the data from these users or these people, that information and that data can always be used later. Right. And that's, that's always like my concern. So it's a big privacy issue.
That's amazing, because I didn't even think about that until you both just brought that up. Indentured servitude comes to mind. It's almost you're chained to a position for a period of time, but even after that period of time goes past, so how can you disenroll? How can you say, no, I want to start my own business, or I want to do something else besides being tied to this one company?
And you know that they won't turn it off. You know that they're going to track you where you go after work, right? This percentage of our employees go out drinking after work, and this percentage shop at Target.
Yeah, because it's geolocation.
Yeah.
It's constantly giving information out.
Because it's RFID.
Yeah. Well, it is that. I mean, it could be recording information in itself, and then maybe every day it unloads when it gets to work. Right? So it doesn't have to be like a gajillion gigabytes big. It can just have just enough space on there to record the latest 24 hours. And every time you report back, then you understand what I'm saying?
Right,
it unloads and erases itself. So I don't know for sure, but that's what I'm thinking. And then the other thing that you have to keep in mind is that the collection of data is not necessarily for the here and now. It's not for, Amadi is at Starbucks right now. Or Ragu is at, I don't know a place
Best
you
Buy,
go. Best Buy.
Just walking around, window shop.
Yeah. There you go. Gateway Computer, those still out? Okay.
I think they're gone.
He at the Gateway.
They're gone, man.
They gone? Okay.
They've gone the way of the gateway.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily just about where you are now. It's about where you were 10 years ago. it's just like the movie Minority Report, where
Welp.
yeah, well, it's about collecting because the NSA does this, no such agency. That's what I'm talking about. And the data.
We love the NSA here, right? Don't.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw
Don't
We
track
love
me.
the NSA. We love.
what's the dude? The Snowden
Snowden,
dude? Yeah, Edward Snowden. You saw that movie? I saw the movie. You didn't see
It
the
was
movie?
great. It
So,
was fabulous.
Yeah. So, that was all about the prison program and the collecting of data, going around the laws and collecting data, collecting the world's data because you can, and to prevent, the idea is to prevent any it's about having leverage in the world, so you don't have to have a physical war. You can have a silent war, info war. And so that means that you can have data on another country, have information on another country, and that country wouldn't ever
They would be indebted to you.
it would be indebted to you.
for a
Yeah,
long
exactly.
time.
So it's all about like the collection of data and collecting our data as people. What happens is that if something were to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, then they can just go search through the data and find out what someone was doing 10 years ago. Oh, so they met up with Eva at
An
Starbucks.
undisclosed
at
location to
RFK
record a
Stadium
podcast.
or something. I don't know. I don't know wherever you go, during your lunch breaks, but you know what I'm saying? Like, and then any kind of narrative can be created in order to establish a particular.
No, you bring up a
reach your
very
goal.
valid point, though,
Yep.
Avery, about the housing of information, especially with just this particular technology in place. There was no discussion on how we're going to encrypt this or put this away somewhere where if a company or intruder hacks into this company's infrastructure, they pull information about all these lists of people and what they've been doing.
Yeah,
It's
data
People get
analytics.
hacked all the time.
Data analytics is a big deal
Well,
right
it's
now. It's just crazy. And
It's funny you bring up a point, Avery. I just wanted to read, for those of you who listen, who read the Bible, right? There's a scripture in Revelation 13 that talks about, you said something about leverage and power. And in Revelation 13, it says, this is verse 15, the second beast was empowered to give life to the image of the first beast so that it could speak and could cause all those who did not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He caused everyone, and by everyone I mean everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to obtain a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. Thus no one was allowed to buy or sell things unless he bore the mark of the beast, that is, his name or his number. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has insight calculate the beast's number, for it is man's number, and the number is 666. So I'm not going to get into, whether you believe what the physical mark is, but the actual point of power, that without it, you aren't able to enter into the system of commerce. Because that's what that means. If you cannot buy or sell, it'd be one thing if it just said you couldn't buy. You'd be like, all right, I'll just go somewhere and take my talents to South Beach. I'll pull a LeBron James, right? But you can't buy or sell. So even if you have a product that you want to enter into the marketplace, you cannot, you are shut out from the system of commerce without this particular mark. So, we just got to be leery about these types of things because I think it's a slippery slope and it takes us into that place where, because eventually companies could say, because you could probably always, quote unquote, opt out, but then you may lose your job, right? They say, well, you know what, it's now company policy that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, your employment could be in jeopardy.
Well, I mean, it could be opting out, like the equivalent of not using a credit card. Like, you don't have to use a credit card, but if you've ever gone to another country, like if you ever get on a plane,
Right.
You have to have a credit card. You cannot fly on a plane, as far as I know, without having a credit card. It's you can't just walk up to an airport and be like, I got cash. Straight cash, homie. It's
Here's
like, no,
$800.
there's
it's
no
terribly
option.
inconvenient. Life is just inconvenient and would be inconvenient without making use of these types of technology.
Yeah, right. Right, and so, yeah. So I agree. I agree with you, and it's the whole. I mean, I find it fascinating that was written as we know it to be about 2000 or so.
Yep.
Gregorian, or was it Julian years?
I forgot when the Gregorian calendar
it's
was.
Julian calendar.
Yeah. Either way, it was a long time ago.
It's a Julian calendar, the year 0 or whatever. And so
The year of our Lord.
Yeah. And
2017.
and that was written around approximately 2,000 years ago. Yeah. And for us to be where we are now in regard to that being a reality, I find that incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, I was going to make a point about that. I think it's irrelevant whether people believe in the Bible or not. You just read something that was written on an island in the Mediterranean, 2 millennia ago, where there would have been no context whatsoever for someone to say for anyone to say what the Apostle John said there. But in addition to that, I mean, just look at the fact that something was written a long time ago. It seems maybe it's coming to pass now, maybe it's not, but at least I think it's worth having a conversation about it. And then, of course, having a conversation about some of the possible dangers of this. I was just thinking a few seconds ago about how, what information is that chip collecting about the biochemistry of the person?
Very good point.
Is it collecting anything? The people who manufacture it can say, okay, the only purpose for this chip is for you to be able to buy and sell within your company, get in the doors, and for us to kind of keep a record of who's in the building and who isn't. But how do you know that that's the only information that's being collected?
Those are probably definitely discussions behind closed door about what other functions that chip can serve.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And the thing is about technology, both Ragu and I definitely understand it, is that for the
Oh, so what you trying to know?
The non-technical the non-technical person has no idea of everything you just said, Eva. That all that is technology. I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna give you a little tip.
Please,
right?
please.
Now, I'm not the smartest person in regard to technology or whatever.
No, Ragu is. No, I'm just
I'm just gonna say this.
I'm on it.
I'm gonna say this in regard to technology. The biggest thing is like location. Where can you get something to be able to do whatever it is you want it to do? So if you can get something in somebody, it can do whatever it is that you want it to do from that location. So they have these things called APIs, or application programming interface. I'm not going to get too technical, but what that essentially means is that it's got hooks in there to be able to connect and do all kinds of different things through APIs. So if you wanted to collect medical data, well, you would connect it to something else, a Fitbit or some other kind of proprietary thing.
Physical
device. And now, boom, you got it. So also there's a certain level of grooming that's happening. Because when these things get rolled out, again, we in this U.S. startup driven capitalistic society, and it's about how do you make things seem like normal
regular
for people
day-to-day,
and regular day-to-day things. And so they have things planned out for okay, so we're going to get people in Wisconsin. It ain't New York. It's some, no disrespect to our Wisconsin listeners, but it's like, a small place. Let's try it out. Let's test it here. Once we get the positive feedback, then, we roll it out to DC.
Oh, yeah.
And then after that, then it's going to be like, oh, and now, it can help do this and help do that.
Before it comes
Amazon
to
Go.
Before
Amazon
it comes
Go's
to
coming.
the masses, it will have been, all the kinks will have been worked out.
It's interesting. I went to a tech conference for middle schoolers a few months ago, and there were drones there. And, right now, drones are a consumer product. Photographers use them. People who want to have fun with them. But just 5 years ago, we knew about drones then, but we can look over the course of the last decade, or even the last 5 years, and see how something was put out there. And initially people said, what in the world is going on?
It's crazy.
And then, like you said, there's a psychological impact where you continue to mention it and you talk about its attributes. Next thing you know, and this can be mentioned in a lot of different aspects of our society, including what we accept socially, technologically, and otherwise, where a short amount of time will go by and all of a sudden it's second nature for people.
Yeah. Well,
this is going to become second nature for people. Like my company, I'll give you a prime example. The company that I work for, my day job, right? I don't run podcasts. 9 to 5 guys. Newsflash. In the last 6 months, they've changed like 3 company policies. And I tried to fight it for as much as I could, but it got to a point like I'm in construction management, for those of you who don't know.
You got a chip, bruh? Is that what you about to tell them? You got a chip in your nose?
Right. This little piece of skin in my hand. No. They changed company policy early this year saying anyone who drives on company time has to submit insurance information, your personal insurance information, right? Even if you don't drive a company vehicle, which I don't. I drive my own vehicle. I'm just reimbursed. But they're like, nope, if you're driving on company time, you are going to submit insurance information. So I fought it for a couple months. But finally they were like, if you don't submit it, we're not going to reimburse you anymore. Like, that's it. If you want to continue to work here and drive around, you're going to submit your insurance information. Then, like within the last month, they changed stuff with the insurance. They said, now you have to verify all your dependents. So I had to give them a copy of my marriage certificate. I had to give them a copy of my children's birth. Yeah, within the last 30 days, I had to give them a copy of my kid's birth. Now, my kids have been on my insurance. Like, this ain't like I just had a kid yesterday and this is like existing people. Oh, we want to verify your dependents now for your. I'm like, yo, what in the world's going on? But it's going to come to a breaking point where that's why I say it's going to come to a point where you're either going to be in or you're going to get shut out, right? It's not just I'm comfortable with it, but it's still optional.
George
right?
Orwell was right, but he was just 30 years ahead of it. I mean, this is literally Orwellian. Big Brother, a lot of people would say, oh, man, it's conspiratorial. You're not a conspiracy theorist. What are you talking about? Just take a look around.
I got to read that book, 1984.
And that's a good, because a lot of us had to read that when we were really little.
I haven't even read that.
Yeah. But, we had to read it when we were really little. But sometimes it's worth re-examining some of these texts.
No, we have to definitely be mindful. We have to, the Bible always talks about, he who has the ear to hear, let him hear. So we have to see and, and not just listen. And once you see and you listen and you hear, you have to be willing to sort of make that jump because you may have to.
So the one thing I was just going to go back to the point you were talking about something being brought down to consumer grade. So the thing I was referring to or even thinking about was just drones in general.
Yeah.
That was a military purpose. That was never in the intent, or at least not initially, to bring down to the purpose of having a consumer grade piece of device to just fly around and look at things. No.
I mean, that's the internet. That's what the internet was.
Yeah,
when
exactly.
It's
all serving a purpose for the military or the government, if you will.
Yeah, and just to provide, like, I guess, an alternative view, I have a friend that I work with, and he's all into like technology and robotics and bioinformatics, and he actually loves the idea of having a chip in his hand. And he loves it
because of the convenience. What is it?
He's all for it because exactly that. He loves the idea of extending the capabilities of the human body. And I remember watching a documentary, a little short mini documentary about one of these cons, like Comic-Con or Dragon Con, where there's like a Wetworks kind of con or like a biotechnology con or cybernetic con where people are get enhancents. They get things put in their eyes, things put in their skin.
Now this is at the actual convention.
Wow. Yeah, they either show up at the convention, or they haven't it already done, or they get it done at the convention.
Wow.
They like manufacturing Avengers, pretty much, is what they do.
Yeah, wow.
Age of Ultron.
Right.
They just had a Comic-Con. Oh, they have every year a few of those conventions down at National Harbor. So
word?
Yeah, sometimes when you go down there, you'll see like with Comic-Con, you see people dressed like all kinds of comic book figures, and it's really entertaining. But this stuff is going on all around us,
and it's going on behind the scenes. I mean, for those of you who listen regularly, I've told you that we record in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And if you're in this area, whether you're in technology, whether you're in education, whether you're in construction, all of these fields are going to have, at some point, they're going to run across the government. And if you do enough work with the federal government, you're going to realize the government does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. A lot. Like a lot. Capital A, capital L, lot. And so these things, while they should not surprise you, because honestly, in order to stay in power, human beings are going to do whatever they need to do to stay in power. It's just more so that you have to be mindful. These little small tech companies, don't think that this is not on the government's radar. At one time, Google was a small tech company. Don't think that wasn't on the government's radar, that there's going to be a company that in and of itself is bigger than everything else on the internet. Like Google is the internet at this point, right? You see what I'm saying? That stuff doesn't go past the government's radar. And so this little small company in Wisconsin testing out chips on 50 people, this is not off the government's radar. This is on their radar because, like we were saying, it
could be funded by proxy. You don't know.
Right,
they could have an SBIR grant.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, we don't know the financials. You're exactly right. But what we have to do is just be mindful as believers in the midst of change. And I don't know, speaking of people who need to understand change and being mindful of things that shift and change around you as we pivot here. I think 3 of us here have gone to HBCUs, right?
HAMPTON.
Enough of that. Enough of that.
Pirates fight and win.
Enough of that.
Represent represent Ragu. What's up?
So UMES Hawks.
Right.
A long time ago.
What does that stand for?
University of Maryland Eastern
University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Gotcha.
University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Very beautiful campus.
Very agricultural driven.
I haven't been. I didn't go to a.
Oh, I thought you went to Morgan.
Nah. I just had a lot of friends.
UMBC, right?
Yeah, I went to UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Which, by the way, the president, Freeman Hrabowski, is a graduate of HAMPTON.
Okay.
Is he really?
Enough of that.
Well, my president has been black. So that Obama stuff ain't nothing new to me.
Well, we don't have no choice at UMES. All our president is But anyway,
black.
So there was an NPR article this week about some of the things that transpire when the neighborhoods around HBCUs no longer reflect the population of the school themselves. And we're talking about gentrification, right? I'm just going to put it in layman's terms. I think for a lot of us at the table, myself included, there's, 2 sides to that coin. There's the one side where you may have an HBCU, and that's historically black college or university, for those of you who didn't know what I was talking about. You may have an HBCU that was once in a black neighborhood, right? Or, whatever, minority neighborhood, and then the neighborhood changes.
Yeah.
And then you have that conflict. Then you also have just HBCUs that already exist in predominantly white neighborhoods, and you've always had the conflict. Like, I can speak from that perspective in terms of, UMES is in a neighborhood that has always been hostile to the campus, because the majority of the town, the county, is not minority. It's not African American, and so there's always been this level of hostility from law enforcement. From Somerset County. There's always been a level of hostility from the residents. And so almost to the point where you're not welcome here. Like, we don't care if you're getting an education or whatever. You're just not welcome here. So keep your activity to the campus. And so one of the things that the school has done, and, I went to the school in the late 90s, so this is a while ago, is the school at that time started to buy up a lot of the property around the campus to actually, so the campus grew. In my time there, and since, the campus grew tremendously because they were just buying up buildings and stuff around the campus, because a lot of the things, there wasn't a symbiotic relationship between the town and the university. Now,
AJ, I just wanted to say real quick that that's an ironic thing as well, because when HBCUs started, of course, for the purpose of educating African Americans. Cheney back in 1837. This was during the time that slavery still existed, although not particularly in that state. But then a lot of them sprung up around the end of the Civil War. The whole point was to educate people who had been marginalized with respect to education for the previous 2.5 centuries. So I think it's ironic that you're talking about hostility with your school in particular, because there was hostility back when the Freedmen's Bureau and other organizations were planting these colleges and universities in the first place. And so it's interesting how people will say there's a lot of progress that had happened in the United States, yet your campus is still experiencing hostility, maybe for the same reasons, maybe for different reasons, but that's interesting how that strain exists still.
Oh yeah, I remember when I was going there, the school did an extensive survey because the University of Maryland Eastern Shore was actually founded with the same land grant that University of Maryland College Park was founded. It was the exact same one, 1890. Shoot, I forget the year. It was late 19th century, and as the school was doing it, they were finding out that people in that area had actually co-opted university property. There were people that had built homes on the property because, I mean, you're talking late 19th century, right? Rural Maryland, we are below the Mason-Dixon line. Although Maryland is not the quote-unquote deep South, still, in certain respects, the South. So they had found out that people had built homes and houses. So I don't know how it is
after
now.
the land grant.
Like
so
after
they
the
knew
land
what
grant.
they were doing.
They knew what they were doing.
And that goes back to a trend on this continent in general.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to go back to HBCUs in a second, but even during the time where you had Indian land or so-called Indian land. So during the time of President Jackson. There was land, even though you're pushing Native Americans off of their land, there were always treaties that said, okay, now, boom, this is your land. And as soon as the frontier would be established and it would be determined that Americans are on this side and the Indians will have their new lands or be pushed further west on that side, you would have Americans creeping over into that frontier and planting their houses and their land and then complaining to the government that hostilities exist. Mm-hmm. So it's an American tradition for people to establish their homes on lands that were specifically designed to help minorities who had been oppressed for all that time. Mm.
And then so the other side of that coin is what other schools like Howard University. We live not too far from Howard University, one of the largest HBCUs in the country, right? Is when the neighborhood changes. For those of y'all who don't know, like a lot of major cities, New York, Chicago, DC is being gentrified. It's been going on now for close to 10 years. And so where early 2000s, late 90s, where Howard was maybe in a lower middle class neighborhood, it's not that anymore. That side, it's a couple miles north of Capitol Hill, just to give you perspective of where it is in the city. The area, the property value of the area surrounding Howard University has increased exponentially. And so it's kind of weird because in the article, the person writing the article was saying how where 10, 15, 20 years ago, they had to worry about different things in the neighborhood. You had to worry about getting robbed or getting attacked. And now you got to worry about them seeing you as the threat, where before you were concerned about the threats outside of the campus. Now the concern is, well, with the other folks moving around, because I think there was like 5% of the people in that area were non-African American, and now it's like 25%. So now you have to, as a black person in America, listen, again, I've said it before, we have a certain level of, cognizance to realize, am I being perceived as a threat, right? Now you have this cadre of, I don't know, how many students are at Howard?
It's about 10,000.
10,000 African-American students, right? Well, not all African-American. Let's call that 80% of them are African-American, right? In this concentrated area, surrounded by a changing neighborhood who may perceive them as a threat.
And that's one of the most terrible things about gentrification. I do want to say that one of the things about gentrification that's really difficult for me to accept is that you have some people who move into a neighborhood. They did their research. They looked to determine if they liked the neighborhood, if they wanted to buy homes there. they made a conscious decision to move into a neighborhood, and then they turn around on it and want to change that same neighborhood that they deliberately moved into. It's similar to the drumming incident at what used to be called Malcolm X Park, or back home in New York in Marcus Garvey Park. There are traditions that have existed for decades upon decades. Friday night drumming, Saturday night drumming, just cultural traditions.
Yeah.
And there are people who move in and then want to change that or complain about things that they moved in for.
Yeah, I'm from New York. I'm from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And
Still claiming the. No,
That's how we do.
And I remember. Let me not mumble rap my statements. I remember.
Little Avery Vert. No, I'm just kidding.
Who started? Who's the biggest? Was it Chief Keef? I think Chief Keef probably, because he's
Chief
probably the
Keef
most
with no teeth.
extreme.
Waka Flocka maybe, or Waka Flocka before him.
I don't know, man, but I know Chief Keef was probably like the most extreme. He don't even rhyme. So okay, so that was we just went down the
But go
path.
ahead.
So let me pull it back. I can remember in Brooklyn, I read an article. I wasn't there at the time, but this is a recent article about a mural. It was a Notorious B.I.G.
Oh, yes.
Mural that was up, and
Yeah, I remember
actually, I think I have an idea where it is. And I read the article about how the local community, the homeowners association, whatever it was, voted for the mural to be taken down because they felt like it was it caused too much walking traffic.
Yeah, people were
crowds.
visiting and taking pictures of
Yeah.
You moved into the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn. Why did you move there?
You want to get it taken down because it's an inconvenience.
You saw when you were looking for your brownstone, you saw the big mug right there, and then you're going to come in and then say, "Oh, now there's too much foot traffic." Are you serious?
Yeah, I know. Spike Lee, he had he wrote something about maybe 2 years ago. I want to say he did a video, and then it was an actual article for the New York Times, the Daily News, or whatever it was. But then he was talking about the gentrification that's taking place in Fort Greene, which is like ground zero. Well, that in Bed-Stuy, like my street growing up, was like ground zero of gentrification in the United States. Anyway, he was talking about how new neighbors had called the police on his father, Bill Lee, who I think he played the trumpet
Or something like that.
saxophone,
Yeah.
saxophone. And they called and complained about the noise. Now, I actually grew up in a house very similar to that. My grandfather was a jazz musician. He has since passed away. But my grandfather, we lived in a brownstone.
Yeah.
And I used to be woken up Saturday mornings hearing him practice his music, practice his saxophone on the keys on the saxophone. And that's just what it was. That's a part of the fabric of the society. It's not a nuisance or a disruption. Mm-hmm. It's
just one thing I just wanted to say about that is that, I think that's probably one of the differences between
expectation.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the differences between black gentrification and white gentrification. Because one thing that I've always pushed, since we started seeing this as a phenomena, is that middle-class black people also move in, or upper-class black people and people of a variety of backgrounds also move in and take advantage of low real estate costs and make changes to neighborhoods by virtue of the increase in the property taxes. My brother, it was a part of a group of DC, for those who don't know, there are people who come here every single year, new college graduates, earn a good salary and are building their lives here. And so he was a part of a group that tried to gentrify and they didn't say it like this, but they moved into, certain parts of Anacostia, assuming that that this would be a good investment. So there are all kinds of people who gentrify, but I think there's a difference between when we see black middle class and upper class people gentrifying neighborhoods versus white ones. This is a generalization because obviously not all white people who gentrify will complain about about some of the pre-existing conditions that they moved into, but we see it more with those who don't look like the neighbors that they moved next to, like with your grandfather or with Spike Lee. And so I bring that up because Spike Lee's store was right across the street from my high school. I went to high school in
Spike's
Brooklyn.
joint?
Yeah, Spike's joint. I went to Brooklyn Tech. Brooklyn Tech was literally right across the street from Spike's joint, or the other way around.
Oh, you was freshly dipped in all the latest Malcolm X hats and shirts.
40 acres and a mule. But the thing is that some people came back there was some pushback at Spike Lee's article and some of his concerns from a few years ago, saying, what are you talking about? You're a rich man and you gentrified this area as well. But I did not see Spike Lee and other people with means of color who gentrified, trying to change the fabric of the neighborhood, change the culture, move into a place and then change it. If you want to live in a different type of environment, then move to the type of environment that you want to live in.
I mean, I think that's what it is. It's not necessarily an economic thing. It's more of the culture. It's the culture of the thing.
No, I disagree, Amani. I think it's the economic thrust, because gentrification.
Are you disagreeing with me?
I am absolutely disagreeing. The thrust of gentrification is to move the middle class people into an area that's essentially at a lower cost of living at that point.
Yeah.
And then the people that move in, they'll change the culture naturally, because that's what they want. They want certain things. They want be able to walk their dogs, or be able to walk to stores, or whatever the thrust is for that city. So
Yeah, but do you think it's an economic thing or it's a culture thing? That's what I'm saying.
How do these things happen? Like, you have homeowners associations, then you have municipalities, and please, if anybody knows more about this, let me know.
you can take lead on this one.
But I mean, trust me, there's plenty of people who know more about this than I do. But with that said, I am a homeowner and a landlord, and I pay a condo fee. I'm also part of a condo association, which is essentially, it's a homeowners association, is what it is. And I've also lived in Baltimore. I currently live in Tacoma Park. I lived in Washington D.C. And there are a lot of things that I learned. And some neighborhoods stand for things, and some other neighborhoods don't. And I see that.
But when people move in, would that neighborhood still stand for that thing?
I think it all depends.
Can you give an example? What's one thing that a neighbor, of course you don't have to name the specific neighborhood, stood for and said, look, you're coming in here, you're going to have to accept the way we do things, versus other examples?
Okay, yeah, sure. So
I can tell you right where we are now. I'm not going to say my city, but where we are right now, literally in this community, there used to be a golf course here. If you go out the front door when y'all leave, I'll show you. There used to be a golf course here. Now that the neighborhood has changed and it's predominantly African American, the golf course shut down like 3 years ago. My neighbor was telling me.
What kind of golf course was it? Was it a predominantly black?
Well, it was a public golf course. It's a public golf course.
So this
when
wasn't
the
owned by,
demographics
like, a
of the
club or whatever.
and you joined the golf club, but when the demographics of the neighborhood changed, the golf club shut down.
Is it because the middle
Don't
class
play golf. The middle class black people in this
who
neighborhood
bought these houses just don't play
they
golf?
don't play golf.
Okay.
So just as an aside to that, something that was probably culturally to the people who were here, because it was a golf course, has changed because the demographics of the neighborhood has changed. So there's two sides to that thing, because there are still, this is not, I mean, it's not totally black, but it's majority black. There's still a lot of white people that live in this neighborhood. Yeah. I'm recording at my house, so you hear me now. But because the demographics have changed, some of the things that were here, some of the flavor of this community has changed. You see what I'm saying? So I don't know if is that sort of in line with what you were saying?
No, it's a part of it. I think that there's a tie between politicians who are also members of neighborhoods, but they can sign things and allocate money to go to certain areas. And then homeowners associations. And so, okay, I can tell you one thing. So when I was living in Baltimore, I moved into a place that was dealing with a a lot of crime. I don't know if it was a crime wave, but I know that there was crime that was happening that was pre-existing. But there was also a property manager who wasn't doing a good job in securing the building, right? And there have been multiple incidents. But what I learned after having lived there is that the people living in that property didn't talk to each other, like in an apartment complex. So the property manager was able to get away with, oh, really? That happened? Oh, that never happens, telling everybody individually. But then when people start talking, you start learning that, no, this is a pattern. And the property manager doesn't do anything about it. But one of the things that I learned living out there that people probably won't tell you is that you get more police in a certain area by the more by the more incidents that you file. So if the community, if the members of the community in an apartment complex, if the residents got together and whenever something happened, you filed the incident report instead of just treating it as like, oh, it was just kind of like a one-off thing, we'd have more police. We would have more police patrolling there, and by definition, there would be less crime. But because the community doesn't get together, you get those kinds of effects. You also have property managers that and landlords, building developers that lie, and they make certain promises to the people in charge of that particular area. They lie to the homeowners association within the particular area that they're not going to do something, and then they do it, or they will do something and then they don't. And by the time the building is built, I mean, it's just kind of like, oh, well, you just got to deal with it. Whereas you have other communities that are a little bit more, or a lot more, they stick together a lot more.
Yeah.
And so they just, there's certain things that they stand for and certain things that they don't. Some communities, like even around in this neighborhood here, and not just here, but it's very popular in Maryland to not have sidewalks in your community, right? With a lot of the single family homes,
limited foot traffic.
Limited. It's a reason why places like Whitmore North, a lot, and I'm just name dropping that, but it's way more than that.
Yeah.
It's a reason why you have these entire communities with these houses, but then there's no sidewalks. People got to walk on the street, or in Glendale, all kinds of places. And the reason why that is to make it inconvenient for random people to walk through the neighborhood. Period.
Yeah, Northern Virginia is notorious for that. I remember when I first started working out there as an educator, I would just say, well, wait a second, there's no sidewalk? What if someone was getting their car, serviced? What? So yeah, that's interesting. And so let's contextualize what that means. Okay, well, that makes sense for no random people. So that means that you're not going to have that many people who can get there, like,
without a car,
mm-hmm. Right? You need a certain means. It requires transportation, which means that you're not going to get a lot of random jokers who don't have means, or people getting off the metro or off the bus, that's just walking through, or congregating in front of your house or at your corner, or that's what it's for. So,
I think people think that this is like a new phenomenon when it's not. If you are familiar with Washington, D.C., you'll even notice the way the metro is designed.
Yep.
There's a big section of the city that there's no metro.
Won't even touch. Yeah.
Georgetown.
That was by design. The entire upper Northwest, the red line goes around it, because when the metro was being built, the people in that part of the city were like, we do not want public transportation coming through this part of the city. So guess what? It does. It doesn't go up there.
Yep.
So this, gentrification and the notion that certain cultures, right, have certain things that are native to that culture, right? That's not a new phenomenon. And so, just to really bring it back to this discussion about the neighborhood gentrifying around HBCUs, Howard in particular, just because we're here in DC, is that the economic part, I think, is a secondary thing, only because if people were of the same culture, right? Just like what you were saying about middle class black people, they may move in, but you don't lose as much of the culture, even if they're of a different means. I'll give you a prime example. When I left the northern part of the city, there's a big Caribbean community up there, right? There's not as much out here. So, like, if I want to go eat, if I want to go shopping, I got to go up there. I got to go to Hyattsville, Tacoma Park, Silver Spring, Wheaton. I got to go up there. There's nothing out here for that particular group of people, for that culture. So the people, even if you're of a certain economic means, they move up there. Like, I talked to a guy that I work with. He's Puerto Rican. And he was asking me, yo, why did you move out here? I was like, well, I was looking for more space. He lives in Wheaton. He's like, yo, I can't leave this area. He's like, because all my stuff is up here. He's like, I'm going to have to find a spot up here. Like, I'm not leaving this demographic. Even though he's got a big government job and doing X, Y, and Z, he wants to stay within a certain perimeter because of the culture of the neighborhood. So I think when you lose the culture, by default, everything else is like dominoes. It's just like, it just falls out. So I think for a lot of these neighborhoods, if people of color were moving into it with the same economic level, if all the economics are the same, but it's a different culture of people, I think it would not be as much of an impact as it would be when you have people of that economic means and they're of a different culture, so they come in changing the culture.
I think this also speaks to the responsibility of the HBCUs. This is not just for me to big up my own school,
Lord.
This is not just for me to big up my own school. One thing,
right?
But one thing that Hampton has done, we're right across the street from downtown Hampton, Virginia, and so we've actually purchased a lot of that if you can call it a cityscape, because Hampton, Virginia is a small little town.
You see how she said "we"? You like that?
but a lot of the the cityscape that you see is owned by the university, and the university has its land, and then it's expanding, and it's actually making use of that town in that way. And so I think it's really important that universities, whether we're talking about Langston all the way down in Oklahoma in a rural area, or even Prairie View, which I think is in a rural area, or ones that are in urban areas, don't just sort of stick around your boundaries. You should be expanding anyway. Yes, it should be for the good of the community, but it should also be balanced to be for the good of the university.
And according to one of the articles that I had researched for Howard University, that's exactly what they've been doing. Yeah, they've been buying up property around Howard University, and they're building a property at the moment that's going to house, like, I can't remember, it was 300 units, 70 units. It was a pretty big number, but they did say that it's probably going to be white people that's going to be moving in there. And so they said that they have to figure out how to find some kind of way to be able to have some kind of like cultural they have to get along so that the things don't turn into, like you were talking about before. And also what was alluded in the article is that that the black people who historically seen as the ethnic other don't start to feel like they are being targeted in their own neighborhoods, right, and have to move and like they're less than.
Well, that's really a delicate balance, yeah. So if you're a university, you want to, of course, continue to invest in your area for the benefit of your university, for the benefit of your endowment, and really being able to give scholarships or whatever it is that you're trying to do with your university. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the neighborhood is something that you're contributing to culturally, and not just sort of giving those properties out and then having an invasion. It should be, okay, this is the sector of the city where Howard University is, or Lincoln University is, and you can see that reflected in the culture of the area.
I think there has to be something that, like I'm not even sure. I'm not an expert on higher education, but there has to be a symbiotic relationship between the area and the university. I think it's impossible for the university. I think about University of Maryland, the main campus. Like College Park is University of Maryland.
Yeah.
Like
That is College Park.
Yeah, like the city and the university are like one in the same. Like there isn't this. That's the university, and we're it's like
It
it's
is
all
the center of College Park.
Like Happy Valley,
Yeah.
and
State
Penn
College,
State.
yeah.
Penn State.
So
College.
we gotta, we have to figure out, and for those of you who might have gone to HBCUs or really any college campus, it's a humongous congregation of people, right? So there has to be some kind of symbiotic relationship with the surrounding neighborhoods, the surrounding areas, and we can't, lose sight of the fact that the college campus has a culture and the surrounding area has a culture, and there has to be a bridge to tie those two together. Like there has to be some common ground where the two tie. They can't exist side by side and just think they can be polar opposites, right? And just think it's going to be, it'll work itself out. No, it's not going to work itself out. There has to be some kind of link or bridge to sort of connect the two together, I think.
And newcomers need to respect that they moved into a context.
Right, an existing
I
context.
mean, what are you doing? You're just going to move into a historic neighborhood and then say, no, we want to change it. Why did you move there in the first place?
Well, okay. Well, what about the other end of the end of the spectrum, the other side of the story? Like, well, what if nothing is done? What if what are some examples? Like, what if what is the end of the story in that regard? Like, what happens to Howard University? They continue down this track.
I mean, honestly, I said,
and Georgia Avenue, and I guess that would be the Petworth neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right?
all the way up. Yeah, I mean, like I said, giving you an example from someone
Or
who went to a
Detroit Park.
HBCU who was already surrounded by a white neighborhood, it'll be contentious. There will be a contentious relationship between the students at the university and the surrounding neighborhoods. And you can already see that. That's why there's no Caribbean Festival on Georgia Avenue anymore, because the residents is like, we're not having it.
That's amazing.
Like,
That's amazing.
That's what will happen. That, as someone who's from the Caribbean community, that's why there hasn't been a Caribbean Festival in Georgia Avenue in like 5 years.
Universities need to assert themselves. You've been there since 1866. What do what? Are you serious? I mean, are you really going to let it just fold like that? Or is this just a result of capitalism and,
There you go.
I mean, and you just have to grit and bear it. I mean, but does a large university that has roots there have to grit and bear it?
When you're dealing with powers
Or
beyond
grin and
you,
bear it?
I think when you're dealing with powers beyond you may have to. Thank you for rocking with us. In the second half of this week's podcast, we began a discussion on Christian music. It was deep and lasted longer than we planned. So because of that, we are doing a disc 2. So we thank you for supporting us, and to continue listening, go to episode 8, disc 2.